Hello, hello. Welcome, one and all. This is the first ever episode of the YAC Boys DDD podcast. This is a fantasy football podcast brought to you by the YAC Boys. YAC Boys presents fantasy football.
Yeah.
And I'm here with Nick, my co-host. Nick, how's everything going?
I'm great, Kyle. I'm so excited to talk some football. It's been a long off season. This is a continuation of a baseball podcast Kyle and I do. This is specifically, though, like Kyle said, exclusively going to be describing the Degenerate Dynasty Year 3 league that we play with you guys. So when you hear us talk, if you haven't heard us talk on a baseball one before, this is exclusively about the trades that happen in this league, not NFL trades, not NFL draft picks, our draft coming up in a couple days, our values in the auction, our contracts, all that. When we talk about matchups, it's going to be the matchup of Griffin versus Brad, not the matchup of the Ravens versus the Bucks.
Yeah, I mean, if you're here for news about Jonathan Taylor, will he be traded? We don't know.
It depends if Raymond wants to trade him.
Thank you. That's exactly where I'm going with this. We don't really care about the NFL. We just care about the NFL as a vector to enjoy our fantasy league, right? So that's really what we're here for. And not only is this the first ever podcast for the YAC Boys DDD fantasy football
Triple
league.
D YAC Boys, baby. That's us.
This is also a special episode because it is pre-draft this Friday. We have our third ever draft for this league. And I think it's really exciting because I don't know about you, Nick, but we were talking earlier. This is the only keeper fantasy football league I've ever done. And especially with the auction format, things really are starting to get interesting. I mean, we're starting to see players, like Kevin's team is a good example where he's been really competitive. He was the winner of year one,
reigning champ,
runner up year two. Griff just snuck one past him in year two, but it's like he's building around this core that has now stuck with him into year three. So it's really interesting to see the league become more and more efficient. And I'm just excited to see what happens.
I think you're right. I think it's a testament to it's a very well set up inflation product we use. I think the $1,000 auction budget, I think the flat fee or percentage inflation is a smart way to make sure dynasties can't stay for too long unless you continue to be efficient at each draft. And as a result, even if you have a bad year, you're not really out of it a year or two later.
Great. Well, we've got a great show for you today. First, we're going to focus on, as a pre-draft little test, conducting our very own power rankings. So we're going to rank each and every one of you listening. And if you're not listening,
thanks for right, by the way. These aren't just power. These are literally the rankings of how good you guys are.
And, this is actually, we were talking again before we started recording. This was a little bit more difficult than we both anticipated. I think, just through becoming more efficient, a lot of these teams are pretty good. So some of it's going to be a little ticky-tacky in terms of keepers that we maybe don't like, and we're going to penalize you for those. But it'll be interesting to see, especially pre-draft, where we have each of you, and then post-draft, kind of how it shakes out. But we're going to get started with power rankings. We're going to recap all of the offseason trades, which I think I was in all of them, Nick. So that's going to be a lot of fun for everyone listening.
That's the best part. It's a rule in all these leagues that we do these pods for. We have to be involved in all trades. You cannot trade without one of us present.
Very true. And just like the baseball league, if for whatever reason you arrange a trade that doesn't involve us, which would not be advantageous, we do require a tax of some form. So maybe just like a bench player you can send our way, but we'll figure that out on the fly. We'll recap, off-season trades. We'll also just touch on a little bit of news, draft strategy, things that maybe we're looking for going into the draft Friday. So I think a good place to start, Nick, I think we're going to start from the top. Who are your first players for your 2023 power ranking for our fantasy football league?
And as Kyle just said, we're going to start. I'm going to give you mine. We'll talk through it. Kyle's going to tell you where he has you if I say you. So if I have you high, Kyle does not, you'll find out. You can decide which of us like better. What this is, though, again, is an exercise, and me and Kyle analyzed all of your rosters. Now, keepers have been locked in your auction budget, and we've decided who's in the most enviable position. If I was coming into this league tomorrow as a new guy, not involved already, whose roster would I most want to take over? Whose roster I feel like I could win with this year? That's where I attack this from. I think Kyle did the same thing. And he makes a good point. We don't know exactly what each other did, but we do know, unlike when we've done this conceptually before, we have some pretty drastically different ones on the few we did talk about. So it's going to be really fun hearing us hash it out. Make sure you guys hang this in your bulletin board material spots throughout the season. So in week 4 or 5, if I ranked 10th, you want to chew me out, you should. And you also have to give me a little bit of credit, though, because I made you feel good about yourself. I made you channel that.
Yeah, especially those big matchup weeks while we play you guys, and you can just kind of
If I
an
rank
X
you
on the
under me,
calendar.
you better beat me in the real season, or else you're kind of like just kind of admitting I'm better than you, right? I mean, same with Kyle. If I say Kyle's team is better than yours and you lose to Kyle, that's bad.
Yeah, and
But
Nick,
without further ado, yeah.
I especially like what you said though, just to emphasize, because the way that I rank this was for this year. So there are a lot of keepers that are, great keepers this year with the inflation that we have in place, injury aside. I think great keepers the year after that, and even so on and so forth. So, that's a little bit less of a factor for me in some of my ratings. I'm really focused on who has the best chance to win this year.
Well said. I think for me, it was used more of a tiebreaker. Like if you have a young Trevor Lawrence on a pretty manageable contract, I think he's probably going to be valuable more than just this year. But football is such a variance-based sport. There's so much year-to-year variance in that. And it's also so many injuries, even to quarterbacks sometimes, that I don't really look beyond maybe just tiebreaker to next year either. But again, let's start out here. This is a really tough one here. But my number one team, if I was taking over a single roster to build for this coming season, is Kyle. I think just to summarize it real quick, I think Kyle has a lot of us have between like 4 to like 5 or 6 guys kept, and usually you're using between $400 and $500 to do it when I look at everybody's keepers. But Kyle's got enough legitimate blue chip players like Amon-Ra St. Brown. Calvin Ridley's a borderline round 2 pick right now in ADP. Drake London, Amari Cooper. Receiving core is stacked. The flexes are loaded up there already. Ramondre Stevenson's probably the 15th-ish best running back. He's probably a low RB1, maybe if you really like him, high RB2, even with them bringing in another back to join him. Basically, what this is with Kyle is Kyle's got more keepers than most of you. He's also got more money available than most of you, and he already has a roster that's close to filled out. So all you have to do, get Kyle, if I were you, is go to the draft on auction night and buy like 2 or 3 studs. So you can make these guys your injury backups when inevitably you have a bunch of injuries in week 4. But if I was picking a team, it's yours right now. I would most want. Where do you have you?
Well, thank you. I'm blushing. No, so thank you for all the praise.
You look young and clean.
Young and clean. Yeah, so I do like my team quite a bit. I think there is another team that has more money than I do, but when you look at the per player breakdown, how much I have budgeted per roster spot that needs to be filled, I think I do have the most money. So I do have myself pretty high at number 2 overall. Yeah, so we'll see how it goes. But that's the funny thing about these power rankings. A lot can change after the draft. So I think we're all on high alert. And frankly, when I put this together on my side, I have everyone grouped pretty tightly. So how about number 2?
That's a well-made point too. Even though we have been joking in this bulletin board material I said a few minutes ago, if and when I inevitably have you ranked 11th or 12th, for me at least, I don't know, Kyle might say differently. For me, it was kind of a big 3, kind of another 3 or 4 roughly, and then after that, kind of a mush after that. None of which I liked much more than 7 or 8, and none of them which I liked as bad as 12. So my number 2, still in the same tier, is your reigning champion, Griffin. And I think we're going to disagree here based on a little bit of our conversation pre-show. But I think Griffin, even though he has almost no money at the budget, he is zigging while the rest of you zag, myself included. He literally has, I think, like $50 for the auction here. And he's going to have to do basically his whole bench with that, a couple other spots too. But he has 10 players locked up. So basically his whole team, most of the starters are already on there. And the way I did this for me is when I looked at his team, I compared it to everybody else's rosters with their 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever it is, keepers, and then thought about who can they roughly afford to buy at the auction. And I ultimately landed on, especially in a super flex league, I love Burrow and Watson at 1 and 2 at quarterback. You're pretty loaded there, Griff. I think on top of that, you have by far, and you did, even after the draft, I'm sure you probably will, the deepest running back core. Josh Jacobs, Travis Etienne, James Cook, Miles Sanders, and Alexander Madison are all RB1s or 2s. By most, I mean, they may not being that, but they are going into it. So there's a lot of capital there to make a trade too if he needs to. A lot of us are running back needy. And then in addition to that, though, at receiver, Tyreek Hill, blue chip star. Metcalf was excellent last year. He probably will be again. I think Hopkins is useful. So basically everywhere but tight end, I think he's got either good or great players. I don't really care. He can't buy guys at the auction. He doesn't really need to. And Griffin has shown us, I kind of include this too. I know the owners in this. I know Kyle makes a lot of trades. We already talked about you're involved in all 3 trades. Griffin, I think, probably will make it if I were to bet, let's place it 1.5 over under between week 1 first game, Kyle, and now Griffin makes 1.5 or more trades over under.
I would take the over.
I would too. I don't know about before the draft, but I'm sure once the draft is over, he's going to trade to someone who got no running backs like me. I have one running back, he's not special, and I might be in a position where I have to trade you something to get James Cook, Miles Sanders, Alexander Madison, just to fill a spot. And I think Griffin's going to capitalize on that. I think he's in the second best spot.
Love it. Yeah, that's a great analysis. It's tough for me. I think.
Where did you have Griffin?
So for those of you who haven't had the chance to listen to our baseball podcast,
where you love him.
Yeah, Griffin and I have been in this love-hate relationship. We've built up a little bit of a rivalry, I would say, and Griffin is someone who I think we probably have similar strategies overall in fantasy. I really like the way he kind of values players, and I think he's taking a really unique strategy going into this draft. Like Nick said, Griffin has the most filled out roster of any team. He has 10 total keepers, but on the flip side of that, I think he only has $8 or $9 per player that he still needs to fill out on his roster. To Nick's point, he doesn't really need to, right? He still has, Josh Jacobs. He has, borderline, first round player, probably not in this format, but, Tyreek Hill, in my opinion, he is a first round player in this format. So he has some great talent. I have him 10th overall. The reason is because just comparing some of these other teams. Sorry?
Nickname for the year is Bottom 3 Griff.
Bottom 3 Griff. It really comes down to this. Comparing his team as is right now against other teams and what they could potentially add, I had to dock him. I had to penalize him for that. I do want to go out on a limb here and say that I think Griffin made the right decision in keeping Tyreek Hill. I think that was probably a tough one. I think we talked about this a little bit before, Nick, but I think where it gets tough is that given, the keeper of Tyreek Hill at that price, I think there are a handful of other guys that if I were in his shoes, I probably would not have kept. But, then again, I was not into Josh Jacobs last year and Griffin was. So could turn out to, really benefit him. So we'll have to wait and see.
What you just made too. Because I agree with it to a T. I think when I look at it, even though I don't think he necessarily overpaid for any of them too much, I would have personally preferred to have probably cut one of these running backs and maybe Hopkins off as keepers. I would not have kept all of them. Even though I think you would get me leaving a little value on the table, just the flexibility of the draft does matter a little bit. I didn't dock it for it personally. So I think Griffin loves to be the guy who buys the $1, $2 players at the very end. He's used to doing that. He's good at it. He's a stars and scrubs guy most years in every league I'm in with him. So I think he's good at it. He's going to have a good time with it. But you're making a good point that he's going to have to really hit on some of those.
Yeah. So I have him 10 overall. I know we have less than a minute here, so we'll jump to a quick ad.
That's our show.
We'll break down the rest of Nick's power rankings.
Thanks, you guys know stuff.
See you in a second.
When we asked Reebok to send us Terry Tate, some people thought we were crazy. But I'm a firm believer in paradigm breaking, outside the box thinking.
Hey, buddy.
Break was over 15 minutes ago, Mitch!
And since Terry's been with us, our productivity has gone up 46%. We're getting more from our employees than ever before.
You know you need a cover sheet on your TPS reports, Richard. That ain't new, baby.
Hey, Terry.
Hey, Janice.
But what's really impressed me is how Terry's become part of the Felcher family.
You get high, baby.
He fits right in here.
That's a long distance call, Doug.
To be honest, I wish Reebok sent us 10 Terry Tates.
Well, when it's game time, it's pay time, baby. Woo!
So welcome back, everyone. But another reason, ranking Griffin so low is tough for me. Just you said this, but we play a lot of leagues with Griffin, and he usually does pretty well. So I think even some guys, if they have a starting place that I'm not personally a fan of, the season is not won right now, right? Like there's a lot of football to be played. So.
I even made that point. I agree with you. I sort of defer to authority if I know someone's going to make a lot of moves or is very active. Yeah. I mean, when it's week 7 and a few of you have started 0-5 or 0-6 or 1-6, and you're kind of checking out, Griffin doesn't usually do it.
Agreed. So thanks for hanging on, guys, everyone listening in. Nick, how about number 3?
Number 3 is a guy with big meat for me. Number 3 is Big Meat Pete. Pete has 5 keepers here for a total of 176. So his 824 available at the auction is a ridiculous amount of money, actually, especially compared to the rest of you. And he has good keepers too. $55 Tony Pollard, I love. It's one of the top keepers, I think, in the league for this year specifically. I think that's like the 6th or 7th best running back. Rashad White also for 26. He looks a lot better with some of these vets running backs signing elsewhere. I mean, I think he's going to have a real chance to be a helpful running back, and maybe a flex if he makes a big move at the auction too. Hawkinson for 43. Love that at tight end. He was like the 2nd or 3rd best tight end down the stretch last year. I'm not ranking him in my mind as the 2nd or 3rd best tight end, but I do think there's a real case to be made. He's in that, non-Kelsey tier of tight ends, and at worst, he's not much behind them. And then I also love Christian Watson at 26. That's an excellent keeper. I said earlier in this, and you did too, Kyle, we're not really worried too much about beyond this year. But I think Watson's real. I think he's a good value this year for sure at that. He's probably going to be good for a couple of years beyond that too. So great keep there, Pete. Daniel Jones with some running around, big new contracts and security there unless he gets hurt. Love that for $26 in Superflex. You're not priced out at every quarterback if you have a tough time with that. But you can also afford to buy someone like a Josh Allen, who I had to throw back. I would do that if I were you probably. And when I look at Pete's roster next to some of the other rosters in this league, outside of basically Kyle's and maybe Griff's, because this is my big 3 tier. I have you 3 ahead of everybody else by more than just like a tiebreaker. I love it. I think Pete's going to be able to buy Josh Allen and then 2 or 3 other studs at the auction, and then his roster look incredible. So way to go, Pete. Good job, buddy.
Yeah, nice job, Pete. And
good job with the meat.
Meaty Pete. This sounds tough, Pete, because I have you at number 6 overall. It sounds pretty weak on my end, but I like your team a lot. And it was really hard for me to do these power rankings. I would say my first 6, that's kind of a pretty surefire thing. I do think that there's a drop off, at least in my books after that. Pete does have the most amount of money. That's obviously a huge win. Pollard, I'm not going to belabor that point. I think Christian Watson is another great keeper. So I love the team. Pete, I think, made all of the right decisions dropping the players he did. I don't think I would have done a single thing differently. I think in this league, as we get more efficient, it is going to be tough coming in with so few keepers. It is true that Pete has, the largest budget of any of us. Pete also needs to fill out quite a bit of his roster, I think, to be competitive this year. So I'm curious to see how Pete will be able to do that in the draft. If he does successfully get, a couple of those, top dogs, Josh Allen, I think Diggs is probably one of the top receivers. I think I'm going to bump Pete up a few points, but we'll have to wait and see. So great start, Pete.
It sounds like the same way I maybe give Griffin a tiebreaker for knowing how he plays stylistically. You're docking Pete because you hate him and you think he's bad at fantasy football.
Well said. Right.
Pete, bulletin board material, baby. Kyle loves your team. I like your team a little bit more, though. And again, Kyle, before I move off of my tier 1, I know we're doing my ranks. Is there anybody else? You said you have a tier of 6 at the top, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I'll break it down when we keep
going down mine, then, I guess. I was going to say, is there anybody else in your elitist tier that I've missed? For me, I do think, again, Kyle, Griff, and Pete are the 3 best by at least a hair for me.
Of my top 5, I'm the only one in my own top 5 that you've named. So we have completely different lists. So I love it.
Unexpectedly, we both love you. Shocking. Let's move on then. Let's see if you have my number 4 in there. So my number 4 team is a previous league champion. What's going on, Kev? Welcome to the top 4. Kev has not a ton, but he has plenty of money of 367 available for the draft. He's got about half his roster accounted for. I love Cooper Kupp, love T. Higgins, love Mike Williams. That's probably the best, or at least the second best 1 through 3 at wide receiver. It's deep. He can afford to have one of them get hurt. Mike Williams at all time. Kupp was hurt last year. They're not necessarily going to get hurt, but even if they do, you still have a good receiving core. I think James Conner, even on a terrible Cardinals team, is going to be solid at running back. McKinnon's probably going to be a useful flex most weeks. I think those are fine too. And then Hurts and Dak, in a super flex, you want good quarterbacks. And I think Hurts and Dak are probably, 2 of the top, 7 or 8, maybe top 10 for sure. Depends where you land Dak. I think Dak's probably 8 or 9. And then Goddard, good value there. And tight ends is a theme I have, at least in my own, if Kyle's going to agree. But when I was looking through the rosters, basically everybody had a tight end, most of us who were good. And if you kept your tight end, there's not many good tight ends out there. And someone's got to start a tight end every week. So there's not many out there. I think keeping Goddard, who's probably the 6th or 7th best tight end, is a really solid keep too. And you can afford to buy maybe 1 or 2 more RB wide receiver 2 type guys and really fill out your roster, Kev. So I think you're in a good spot. What'd you have, Kev?
I love Kevin's team. Kevin is my number 4 overall
Nice.
player as well. So we do have something in common there.
If Kev doesn't finish 4th, I'm going to fucking lose it.
Yeah, so Kevin has a great team. It's called Dynasty for a reason, and I think Kevin has kind of built one here with the core of Jalen Hurts and then the receivers you mentioned in Higgins and Kupp. Simply put, I agree. I won't belabor the point with Kevin. All 3 of those guys are great values. I think Kevin made great decisions in terms of the keepers he did stick around with. He has some flexibility. It looks like Kevin actually can buy his remaining rostered players for around $46 per player. So I think that's pretty fair, and that's average, obviously. So it'll grant him the ability to spend up on a couple more top guys if he chooses to. So
and super flex, he already has a couple blue chippers too. I mean, T. Higgins is excellent, but Cooper Kupp and Hurts are like 2 of the top. If we were doing a draft here, like top 12 picks minimum.
You said it, and that's where the budget is kind of misleading, right? Like if you don't need a quarterback, if you don't need your top receiver, who are you going to spend on? You can just pick a handful of guys, and it's all relative. So I think that's a great point, Nick. Kevin, love the team, and excited to see if you get back to the finals this year.
Yeah, strategically, I think Kyle and I agree that on the higher end, especially, if you have a true blue chip player, and we're going to get to me at some point soon. Hopefully, I'm not too far down on my own list, but like with blue chip guys, where they lead like a Jalen Hurts, like a Cooper Kupp, you pay sort of even at the cost a little bit more, knowing in the draft and in the auction, those guys usually get priced up a little bit too. We sort of have seen it in the first 2 years. Moving on, my 5th team. Let's see. So I've got 2 of your top 5 now and my own top 4. My 5th is Sean Curley. So Sean, I had a tough time moving you around. I had started you a little bit lower than this. I brought you up as it went on, though. I think Chris Olave is someone I was a little bit on my first draft of this, not really realizing is as good as he is. And I also have really become a believer in what Derek Carr can do for a good receiver, watching me do with Adams last year. So I think a combination of quarterback and super flex is big. And you having Rodgers and Jimmy G for a total of 123, that's excellent. I think you have good value there for 2 legitimately useful quarterbacks. Tight end, again, I'm going to emphasize it. Mark Andrews is my tight end 2 or 3, and he's a very manageable cost for what you got him for. So if it were me, I would love the ability that you have, kind of like what I said with Pete, to buy 2, maybe even 3 legitimate $180 to $220 players in the auction, fill out your roster, and be in a great spot. I love the guys you kept. Kyle, where'd you have Sean?
I had Sean at 8 overall. Olave is an incredible value, so great points there. Sean has the benefit of just having a lot of money right now. He has, I think, $690.
He does have a lot of money.
Yeah. One point that you did bring up that I really like is the stack of Carr and Olave. That's actually not something I really put much thought into, but I think when you do build around a receiver like Olave, it is nice to kind of have that positive correlation when you are scoring touchdowns, they're both scoring touchdowns. So I think that's really nice. Yeah, I think Sean has a great team. I think this is a big one that will probably move around a lot for me. Given that he only has 4 total keepers, there's a lot of this roster that we just haven't seen yet. So excited to see what happens on draft day there, and not much other color to add.
He's basically Pete Jr. in a lot of ways, where he has very few keepers and a ton of money. I like Pete's keepers a little bit more, but I think, again, like with Pete, you made a good point, Kyle. If Pete has a terrible auction where he just bids on weird guys and he gets a bad roster, it's so possible. And Sean could do it too, but I think I like Sean a little more than you, it sounds like. My number 6 is myself. So I think I am pretty cut and dry here. It's pretty stars and 2 kind of scrubby keeps, and that's it. I'm keeping 5 guys for $569. So I have $431, 43% of my budget available for the auction. Jamar Chase is my receiver 1. Mahomes and Kelsey are combined like $400 something, but it's Mahomes and Kelsey. I'm keeping Geno Smith for 26. And then Khalil Herbert, who we'll talk about a little bit later, is my only running back being kept. I went back and forth on him, as Kyle knows. But at the end of the day, I think a combination of believing he's useful and then also not wanting to be without any running backs on the start of the draft helped me keep him. So those are my 5 guys. Kyle, where do you have me? You better have me higher than I did.
Yeah, so I think I have you much higher overall. All the listeners are probably going to be, laughing just because this is a self-promoting podcast here, but Nick, I have you number 1 overall. And the reason is we keep talking about these blue chip players. We keep, stressing this, and I kind of wanted to save the point for this. You have 3 of my top 5 overall players, right? So it's tough because I know you were juggling with, should I keep Josh Allen? Should I keep Patrick Mahomes? And it's a tough decision to make. Kelsey, Mahomes, and Chase are all top 5 players in this format for me personally. And it doesn't matter if you spent even more of your budget to secure those 3 guys. I think that just given the nature of fantasy football, if you do lock in that top heavy approach with first rounders of that talent, you're going to have a great team. I think looking at what you do have to fill in, you have 11 roster spots remaining. You still have $431. So you still have more money than a couple of other teams. I know that you're going to go after some late round guys, try to get a couple of $1 players. So in reality, you still have a chance to buy 1 or 2 other high level players. So I really like the build. Curious to see, again, what you do with the rest of the draft. But one, I think, difference in our power rankings, I've really tried to add a heavy premium for the ranking of each one of us. That's reliant on the possession of those blue chip players. So I think you've done that with those top 3. So nice work.
Thank you. I would agree with that. The blue chip guys are really hard to get. Would you have, Kyle, putting you on the spot a little bit here, you make a good point. I went back and forth a lot, and we talked about it a little bit with Josh Allen. And because I had Geno and at one point even Love also for the minimum, I did not. But would you have paid the extra, whatever it would have been, about $250 to keep, maybe $260 to keep Josh Allen, if you were me?
I'm not sure.
Or would you have kept him over Kelsey? Maybe that's the other one I considered.
Oh, that's interesting. Kelsey's tough for me. I know, Nick, we were actually talking about a Kelsey trade at one point, and he's one of my favorite players overall. He's in my top 5. And that's just because of the scarcity at tight end. So I believe that you're capturing a lot of value. Kelsey, scares me a little bit at his age, but I still think that it's very clear he's the elite number 1 tight end. I think he'll continue to be. Given that you are keeping Kelsey, I think the decision is Mahomes. I think you made the right decision. Juggling between Kelsey and Allen, I think that's a little bit more interesting. I haven't truthfully given it much look, but you said that Allen was what, $250?
So Allen was about $30 more than Mahomes, which is why, even though I think they're kind of 1A, 1B, I went with Mahomes. And then because I had Mahomes, you made a good point. The stack of Kelsey's 189.
Yeah.
Allen would have been, I believe, like 260 or something like that. And in my mind, if it's close, save $70. I already had Geno and or Love at that point still too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair cost to keep Allen, just knowing that you have him. But I think given that you already have Mahomes, I think you probably made the right decision, right? You have Herbert. I think Herbert's actually a really good player, but you need to build out your roster. You need another running back. Chase is the wide receiver 1 or 2 in my book. So you have a great wide receiver, still need to build out that depth for the flexes. So I think you made the right decision.
Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate that. So moving on to my number 7 now. My number 7 is Raymond Zink. So Raymond is also keeping 5 guys, just like me. Maybe that's why I like his team as the 7th best team. He's keeping them for a little bit cheaper, though, at $478. Or no, what am I saying? I'm just dead wrong with that. He's keeping 6 guys for $303. Looked at the wrong team there. Sorry, Raymond. 6 guys for $303. So he has a lot of money left. He's one of the highest teams with money left. He has almost 70% of his budget going into the auction. He's keeping, though, a rock-solid, cheap Justin Fields, excellent superflex quarterback. Desmond Ridder, he's kind of but also he's the minimum, and he's a quarterback who's going to start, so that's useful. Again, tight ends. George Kittle is being kept. If you're keeping score as I'm going down mine, there's like no top 5 tight ends already, basically. Even we're not even halfway in the league at this point available. So I think keeping Kittle for a decent price, and he has him for a decent price, is good. Kenneth Walker, I love a lot. I think he's a solid high RB2, roughly. He's pretty cheap for Raymond here. And then I love the Lockett keep. Hollywood Brown's a little bit tougher for me, but I think he's still good. And he was on an amazing pace last year before he got hurt. So especially since Kyler's probably going to play most of the year, I like that one at cost fine too. And I think Raymond's in a spot where Raymond has tons of money to buy some blue chip guys, the ones that are out there, kind of like Pete is. But he also has most of his supporting cast and even some of the higher end parts of it, like Fields and Superflex or Kenneth Walker, and even kind of Lockett already locked up. So I think you're in a good spot, Raymond. Not my favorite, not my worst. Number 7 for me. Where'd you put Raymond, Kyle?
Yeah, so this is gonna come and bite me in the ass in a few weeks when Ray just tears up our league.
He's gonna tear your ass up, dude.
So I have Ray ranked 11 overall. And so it's tough. Justin Fields is actually the only player on his roster that really excites me at his price. I think it's especially tough because Kittle is a player I love. $75, not cheap for a tight end. He's already hurt. You know, he's getting dinged up like he always does. George Brittle. Marquise Hollywood Brown, $54. We're not really sure what's going on in Arizona. Kenneth Walker, you know, we're not sure how healthy he is, if he's going to play. Is Charbonnet going to pick up some of that volume? I think there are a lot of questions. And so, Ray, I'm sorry. Looking forward to seeing how draft day goes for you, but I had to ding you. So I do have you at 11.
So to keep it score at home, I hate me, but I love Griffin and Raymond compared to Kyle. I think that's the biggest difference. I like Sean more than you too.
And I love you. I love you more than
you love me a lot more than I love me.
Yeah.
I hate me.
Yeah.
Where'd you have Pete again?
You also love me more than I love me. So
I love you more than you love you too. We're both so modest.
Yeah. So everyone's just turning off the podcast.
This really
point.
is
Everyone's just like, God damn
dude.
it.
This is such propaganda that like, and we like did this like so nefariously. It was like, Kyle, you gas me up. I'll gas you up. All right.
So, but yeah, Pete, to answer your question, I do like his team a lot. I had him at 6. Those top 6 for me, it was really tough. I actually moved it around quite a bit.
I'm just keeping score on who's going to like me as the year goes on, and who's going to like you.
Yeah.
So I have Pete, Raymond, Griffin, and Sean backing me. We agreed on Kevin. Oh, I have you backing me too. I'll back you though.
So I am excited though, Nick, because you're going to have to name them soon. I have 2 guys in my top 5 you have not named yet. So this is going to get juicy.
Well, here's my number 8. Is one of them Austin, Baltimore?
No.
Wow. Okay. Well, let's go through them then. So Austin is who I started talking about when I said Raymond a second ago. 5 guys for $478. So he has a little more than half his budget available. I think Devonta Smith is excellent value at 58. I think Christian Kirk and George Pickens are fine where you have them. Pickens is the one where I might not have personally kept him, but you know what? I don't really believe in Deontay Johnson personally, and I think it's fine to keep Pickens. I think Trevor Lawrence is one of my favorite keeps in a super flex for $60. That's incredible. And then Saquon at $239 at cost, basically, is sort of doing what I'm instructing guys like Sean and Pete to do. Austin's kind of done in advance. He's already locked up a top, like, I don't know, 15-ish player in a super flex league like this, maybe top, whatever you think he is. He has a true RB1, though. Even if it's at cost, it's worth having that security. And I like that for him. So I have him at 8, which isn't loving, isn't hating. Austin, I think you're 8th. Where's Kyle have you?
Yeah, so I'm very close. Austin, I have you 7. So Austin, I do like you just a little bit more than Nick. I think Barkley is great. I'm not too concerned about all of the noise around his contract. I do think he's going to play. I know, Austin, I did trade you Saquon before all of this crap started happening. Yeah, so I love Saquon as the RB1 for Austin. My favorite part of his team is actually exactly what you said with the stack of Trevor Lawrence. I do like Christian Kirk personally. Fun fact on the Jags and Griffin, hopefully I'll win some brownie points back because I know you're a Jags guy. But on FanDuel, I found like a promo. I think it's still going on.
Super Bowl one?
Yeah. So
the wins the wins, right?
Yeah. So if anyone's interested, you have to bet at least $50 on someone to win the Super Bowl outright, any team you want. And for every team that they win in the for every game that team wins in the regular season, you get $5 bonus bets. So you are capped at 10 wins. So if the Chiefs
make your entire money back.
Yeah. So if the Chiefs win 10 games, which I'm sure they will, you get $50 free bets. So it's effectively a free bet. Just to get a little bit of volatility, like inject some more interesting odds. I did bet on the Jags. I like their team a lot. I think they're kind of new Bengals. I think second half of the last season, Trevor Lawrence kind of showed that he was a real difference maker. So I expect him to take a big step up this year. So in short order, Austin, I like your Trevor Lawrence keeper.
Yeah, I think it's one of the best ones in a super flex league like this. Again, I mostly also scored this just on this year, but I think that's one that's going to be good for a few years beyond this too. Wow. So I have 4 teams left that I haven't said in my top 12. There's only 12 of us. And 2 of them are your top 5.
That just goes to show you what this league is coming to right now.
That's wild.
It goes to show you the efficiency and the difficulty valuing players because we have so many keepers like the Trevor Lawrences, like the T. Higgins on Kevin's team, or we talked about Tony Pollard on Pete's team. Like, it's really interesting. It affords you the ability to overspend in other places, and then as such, even if you do value players out, I like to kind of build out spreadsheets and become a big dork about it. But it's tough because then players do go for more than they should when they are in the draft pool. So really interesting stuff. But without further ado, Nick, who do you have next? This is what, number 9 overall?
Yeah, well, Kyle's doing spreadsheets. I'm watching the film like an actual adult. I don't want those nerd stats. And on the film, number 9 is Colt. Is Colt one of the ones you have?
Yes, Colt's in my top 5.
Nice. Okay, so Colt, sorry I hate you more than Kyle, but let's give you some background here. Colt's got 4 guys for 338, pardon me. So he still has about 2/3 of his budget available. I love keeping CD Lamb, love keeping Devo, love keeping Pittman. Derek Carr, I think, is a completely fine keeper, decent value there. And it avoids you being priced out and getting stuck with terrible quarterbacks. I think Carr's going to be very useful. So I love at cost or even a little bit below cost keeping him. Colt is sort of like Sean Jr., the way Sean is Pete Jr., and the way I was looking at this as far as like the way I think their drafts will go. So I like Sean's base a little bit better than Colt's, not in a huge way, but as a little bit of a lean. But if Colt ends up buying the better guys, in my opinion, at the draft in a couple of days, he buys the better auction values with his remaining budget and feels like his roster better. I think just like Kyle's saying, it's very, very much a parity-based thing right now where I could definitely see Colt being like my 3rd best team. So you having him in the top 5 isn't crazy to me. Item 9, though. Where is he for you?
Yeah, so a lot of this is context driven for me. I have Colt number 5 overall. I actually think that his team build is pretty similar to mine in that he has 3 wide receivers right off the bat in Lamb, Debo, and Pittman. That Pittman, slight question mark there. We have to see how Richardson does in year 1. But for the most part, I feel really good about starting all 3 of those players throughout the season. I think that there's an added piece of importance that I haven't quite touched on. In our league, with our flex spots, wide receivers are so dang valuable. So the fact that he has 3, he still has, I think, more money than the average player at 662 left. Colt has the luxury of being able to pivot away from wide receivers in the draft and going towards running backs, focusing on other places that I don't think will be valued quite as much in this draft. And we'll have to wait and see because, you can never know for sure until the draft starts. And then all of a sudden, player X goes for, $380 and you would have never expected it. Right. So we'll have to see, but I do like Colt's core there. I think really great values. So yeah, that's it.
Cool. So we both think Colt's a contender for a playoff spot, basically, right? You think he's probably on the fence getting in. I think he's on the fence getting out, as it is right now. But we mostly think you're in a solid spot, Colt.
Of course. And what's, again, I probably belaboring this, but what's so fun about the pre-draft power rankings, I think all of these teams could make a playoff spot. I don't really have anyone who's out of it. And again, like there's so many players who emerge every year, like Muscle Frog, James Robinson, when he emerged a few years ago, he's a difference maker. He was undrafted, obviously. Even last year, Josh Jacobs, who was drafted, of course, Griffin,
Josh Jacobs was playing in the Hall of Fame game a year ago. He wasn't even a lock to make the team, and he was like, the RB3?
Yeah, Zamir White was actually, I think, pretty close to him in ADP. Yeah. Because people were like, well, obviously the rookie's going to play.
Well, we've seen Jacobs get hurt some. He doesn't catch passes before last year. He's bad. The team wants to cut him, and then also he's a stud.
So the point is we know nothing, but we'll have to wait and see. I think next up is 10 overall?
Yep, so we've got, on my list, 3 teams left. One of them is in Kyle's top 5. So even though I'm sorry we haven't talked about you yet, Kyle loves one of you. My 10th is Sparky. You hate Sparky, or you love Sparky?
I mean, I like Sparky a little bit more than you, but he's not in my top 5. He's not in my top.
Wow.
My
so one of my bottom 2 is in your top 5. All right, well, let's go through Mark.
Yeah, one of your guys is my number 3 overall. So
wow, that might be the biggest difference we have then, right? Or no, what was Griffin? Griffin's 2 and 10. Depends where I have the guy. Yeah, we'll find out in a second. Right.
We'll have to see.
Let's spend some time with Mark, though. So, Mark, 6 guys for a measly 287. Love that Mark has a lot of money available. 713 at the auction. He's on the highest end, basically. And Waddle is one of the best keepers, I think, in the entire league at $54.
Absolutely.
I think Cooks is solid. Odell is solid. They're basically around where I would value them, but you're locking up good receivers as far as a 1 through 3 receiver core there. It's completely useful. Goff at 51, similar to what I just said about a little bit ago, keeping a useful quarterback 2, low-end quarterback 1, and a super flex. I think you want to have at least one going into it, so you have something you have. I love Mark keeping generally Goff 51. I think Akers for 51, solid. You're not going to get priced out of all the running backs. And Njoku, I think, is probably around value also. So most of these I think are around value, but they make sense to me. They're probably going to go for this or a little bit more than this at the auction, I think. And Njoku at the minimum is solid though too. So I think he's probably tight end like 9 or 10. But Mark doesn't have to worry about tight ends now. And as I've emphasized, if you're keeping score, we've already kept like 8 or 9 tight ends. So if Mark likes Njoku a bit more than me, it makes a ton of sense. And Mark can also afford to buy, like I said, with some of these other guys, Colt, Sean, Pete, buying lots of the big blue chip guys. Mark can buy the $300 Josh Allen or whatever he needs to buy and make his team look beautiful. So even though you're 10th Mark, I want to emphasize again, for me, 7 through 12 here, my final 6 teams, I have you all in the same tier. So I know Raymond at number 7 probably feels good about himself. Mark might not so much. But I think after the draft, I could totally flip all of these. And I think Mark at 10 is where I think all that money gives him a chance to buy some guys. You had him where?
I had Mark at number 9 overall.
Okay, so we're in the same boat with Mark. We agree on.
I mean, yeah, you said most of it. Waddle is an incredible value. I like Akers and Goff. I actually think Cooks and Beckham are a little too expensive for my taste. To be honest, those are kind of the 2 biggest kind of marks that I had for him that I pushed him down.
The big marks for Mark.
The big marks for Mark.
Big marks for my big Mark.
Yeah, so I'll leave it at that. But I think Mark has a great team. I think you make a really good point having the tight end filled out, having some of these bench players and Beckham filled out already. It gives you the luxury of really focusing on 1 or 2 players to really kind of go in with a plan, knowing that you're going to make a push for.
Yeah, he's in the same structure to me as some of the other guys talking about all the money. So if Mark buys the best guys, Sean, Colt, Pete, you might get bumped for Mark.
Yep.
My number 11 team. Wow, I don't know if I'd prefer if my 11 is your like 3rd team or if it's truly my last place team is your 3rd team. My 11 though is Brad.
Yeah, so Brad is my 3rd overall player.
Oh, I want you to have him last. All right, whatever. So Brad, good. Brad, actually, do you want to talk about Brad? Because clearly you love him a lot more than me.
All right, so this is the top-heavy approach. I actually really like Justin Jefferson. I mentioned, Nick, that you have 3 of my first 5 players, right, in Jamar Chase, Kelsey, and Mahomes. Well, Justin Jefferson is also in that top 5. So is he expensive? Yeah. I think that he should go for more than $300 in our draft. I think, therefore, locking him in and ensuring that you do have him on your team. I think, great job, Brad. I think you made the right decision. And I can understand it was probably a tough one. I love Garrett Wilson this year. I'm a huge believer in Garrett Wilson. And then Jahan Dotson, again, inserting kind of almost like a Deshaun Jackson high volatility guy in for your 3rd receiver. Really like that too. So the fact that you're relying on those top 2 wide receivers at your core, now you can go into the draft, focus on running back, focus on building out the rest of your team. I do think that the wide receiver position will prove to be the most important position in our league this year. So I like the fact that Brad has done such a good job locking down that core.
It's super interesting because I agree with everything you said. I think Pierce was a good keeper. It's the 4th guy Brad kept. And going with 564, Brad's right in the middle of the pack as far as money goes. It's interesting hearing you talk about receivers, though. I actually think quarterback is the most important position to hit on in a super flex. Everything being equal in a vacuum. Injuries happen. Breakouts happen. They happen less a quarterback probably do it running back or receiver. I'm not trying to say that's not possible. But for me, I think the reason I have Brad not in the top half is just I don't love using almost half, of your budget and having 1 running back, no tight end, none of your quarterbacks. Because when I look at the quarterbacks available too, I mean, Brad he has less money, so he's not as well positioned to do so either. Get like a Josh Allen or one of the other top 10-ish quarterbacks left. Or else, even though it'll be a good value team, at the end of the day, when I look at it in a matchup, if you're playing against 2 like low QB2s and they have great everything else, I don't worry quite as much. So Brad, prove me wrong and buy a good quarterback. Maybe find a way to get one of the only tight ends who's out there still. And you could do it. I'm not saying you can't do it. Again, you're all on the same tier for me, the bottom 6 of you. But it's pretty crazy that you have him that much higher than I do. It's going to be really interesting. Brad, when you win the Super Bowl this year, you need to like send me a clip of me talking about you and roast me alive.
Well, and if Brad wins the Super Bowl, you know who's going to be winning against, right?
It's good. Yeah, I was going to say
he's going to be spanking you.
A decade ago, I had the best fantasy team of all time, and Brad walked backwards like on his ass, like skidded his way into the Super Bowl with like Jordan Reed before he ever broke out. Kirk Cousins, his dumbass. No, it wasn't even Kirk. It was Teddy Bridgewater. It was Teddy Bridgewater, Kirk Cousins, like Jaleel Scott or some scumbag who doesn't even exist anymore. And he like beat a team of superstars.
You mean middle linebacker Teddy Bridgewater with number 50?
Exactly, yeah. Brad is the Teddy Bridgewater of fantasy. So maybe I'm like, in hindsight, maybe I'm residually putting Brad lower for hating him in that year a decade ago. Brad, sorry, you should be higher.
Love it. Yeah, I love the variants. I love how different we are on these.
I hope the title, Kyle, I'm not even being funny here, is Brad versus Griffin. So we each have like,
That'd be awesome.
That'd be spectacular. So without further ado, then my 12, the last of my second tier here, is Tim. So Tim's keeping 3 guys for 596. He has 40% of his budget left at 404. AJ Brown is a lot at 288, but he's a stud. So I think it's fine, especially because you didn't have any other real blue chippers to keep when I looked at the guys I would have kept. I think Tua for 89, as long as he's not concussed anymore, is solid for Superflex. He was playing like a QB1 when he was healthy. Herbert for 219 is a lot. But again, I've already said a couple times here, I really do like to have the good quarterbacks. So there's not a ton here. You have to hinder complementary pieces. But if they're healthy, Tua and Herbert's a great quarterback 1-2. I think Brown's a stud. You got to get the rest of your pretty deep league here with the 2 flexes plus 2 running backs and receivers and tight end figured out. And you have less money than most other teams to do it, Tim. That's the only reason you're lower. But I do like your base generally. AJ Brown's probably tough for you. I think with your setup, I would have probably only kept one of him or Herbert. But I think it's fine you kept both. I don't think it's like indefensible or anything.
Yeah, I mean, so I have Tim 12 as well.
Tim's got to win the Super Bowl this year then.
Yeah.
I forgot I said with Brad and Griffin. Tim, I hope you go 13-0.
So sorry, Tim. And Tim, you're going to totally prove us wrong when AJ Brown goes out as, the wide receiver 3 this year. Herbert could even make a push. He's one of the few guys. He could be the quarterback 1 for all we know. I do think he's capable of that. With that said, I think they're both a little too expensive for me. I do like, going out and getting Justin Jefferson for his price. For me, AJ Brown is just a tier below. So I just don't think in my books, I would want to spend so much on AJ Brown. But clearly I do think he's, a top 5 or 6 wide receiver. Tim, I think if I were you, I would go out and target some of the cheap guys. I think when you look at some of the builds that I personally really like, they have, Kevin Cooper Kupp for several years, T Higgins now for several years, and Kev will continue to hold him, I'm sure. There are a lot of guys players who I think are going to be drafted pretty low cost, just due to concerns this year. And then in future years, maybe they're great keepers. So I think there's some really interesting strategies there. But Tim, overall, like the only reason I'm really docking you is I think what Nick said is probably really good advice. I probably would have kept one of those guys. But again, you could completely prove us wrong if they ball out. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've said it for some other guys, so I think it's worth mentioning. I'm not really faulting him too much I know you're not either, but I think it's not indefensible to keep both, even though I think they're both a little bit overpriced for what I'd pay. Just because, you lock in some security, you can plan for your draft now. There's something to be said for that. You can plan knowing I have a top 5 quarterback and I have like the 6th best receiver or the 5th, whatever you rank him as, or the 8th best receiver, whatever he is for you specifically. You can, I think, game plan better. I think on the margins, it helps some. The same reason you probably docked Griffin, where he has too much decided before the draft. He can't really go many directions, kind of boxed in. I feel like Tim doesn't want to keep nobody besides Tua, or nobody besides even Tua in one of them, because you don't want to have too much to figure out either. I think there's something to be said on the margins on both sides of that. Where with Griffin, I'd probably keep 2 guys less. With Tim, I might keep 1 guy less, or one guy less too. But I get why they both went the way they went as they prep for the draft.
Yeah, I totally get it. For me, it's just tough. I know Tim has 13 roster spots he still needs to fill. So I think he's got like 30, maybe $30, $31. per player. So I think it just becomes really tough. Still totally doable. Like Tim, if you find the Josh Jacobs of this year and a couple other guys, you're going to be a scary team.
Cool. So just to recap, I'm going to say my top 12. Kyle's going to say his. Everybody print them out, put them in your bulletin board, and get ready for the year. So I have Kyle, Griffin, Pete, Kevin, Sean, myself, Raymond, Austin, Colt, Mark, Brad, Tim.
And I have Nick at 1, myself, Brad, Kevin, Colt, Pete, Austin, Sean, Mark, Griffin, Ray, and Tim.
Dude, this was such a fun exercise because it is crazy how, even though I think you and I do a lot of the same process for this, how drastically different that just was.
It really is pretty crazy. So guys,
I think a lot of the football is just random though too. Like what's going to happen is not either of us is right or wrong. It's going to be, I loved Mark's Jalen Waddle. Waddle's going to tear his ACL. I loved Raymond's keeping Fields. Fields is going to get benched for some reason or something. Like it's going to fucking happen that way. Or Chase is going to tear his ACL in week 1. My best keeper's gone.
I mean, I'm sure I have the dates wrong on this, but after 2019, the number 1 dynasty player was probably Michael Thomas. Then the next year, 2020, the number 1 dynasty player was probably, Jonathan Taylor, right? And it just keeps going, right? So you're right.
Going into a couple years ago, remember when Clyde was the first round pick for the Chiefs? Well, if we had done a draft that year, Clyde's what, RB2 or 3?
Yes, I loved Clyde.
I can't even play football anymore.
It's crazy. So you're so right. I'm giving premium to all these guys with the blue chips, but it's a scary thing. If you don't have enough depth, you never know what's going to happen with football.
Yeah.
All right.
We have a few minutes up too. Do you want to start breaking down these trades? You want to come back on the other side? Let's come back on the other side.
Highlight.
We're back. Let's break down some trades.
Let's do it. Yeah. So
you're involved in all 3.
Yeah. I won't give too much color to these, and let's see if I can go ahead and share my screen just so everyone can kind of follow along here. But it's kind of fun to see trades, especially in the offseason. Nick and I were just talking a little bit about the baseball league that Nick runs. That's also a keeper league. And I think now that we're seeing so much efficiency in our football league, we're probably going to start seeing some more activity on the trading front. So, excited to see how this year shapes up.
Yeah. Let's start with the least recent of the 3 here. Let's do Griffin and Kyle trading Amari Cooper for DK Metcalf. So because you're involved, Kyle, I'll go first. I think for me, it's close to fair. I'd probably slightly prefer your side, but I think Metcalf is the better player. And I feel like it's hard for me to simultaneously say that I'd rather have more blue chip guys in the auction. I'd rather have locked in some secure guys, and then also say, well, I'd rather have Cooper in your spot because he's cheaper. But in my mind, they're kind of in the same tier, and maybe a tier off, I suppose. But I do think probably the Browns are a little better on offense this year. Now, Watson's not missing half the year. I think Cooper has shown us throughout his entire career now he's a pretty good receiver. Metcalf was excellent. Metcalf will be good again, hopefully, with Geno. But I think they're not that different that it defends paying the extra money. So I think they're both keepers, and obviously they are because you guys kept them. But I would slightly prefer your side here, which I assume you do too if you made the trade. Why don't you lay some light on sort of how it came about?
Yeah, I think this is one that I pursued, and I think Griffin, as you guys know, likes to trade a lot. So this is one Nick said it's darn close. Like I have Amari Cooper and DK Metcalf really right next to each other. I actually don't remember in my rankings who I prefer. But just purely from a cost savings perspective, I was really just looking to cut the cost of my keepers so that I could buy some of the top guys who I really want to target this year. So really, that's the sentiment. I do actually think Watson will be quite a bit better this year. Can't say I root for the guy, but I did go through some of the advanced stats that I like to look at for quarterbacks, and I just didn't see a whole lot different from previous years in Houston when he was really a stud quarterback number 1. He looked different, right? The eye test was certainly not positive, but I think that he'll improve this year. So Amari Cooper is the type of guy I'm definitely willing to buy into.
Even when it was Brissett, Amari Cooper played really well. And Amari Cooper was also, I think, a little bit because he has a tendency to have big games and then disappearance games. He gets hurt a little bit at some points. I think in Dallas, he sort of became this boomer bust archetype, but he's not really that. He's a good player. He's probably almost every year of his career been a mid to high receiver 2 or better. And I think he is that. And I think Metcalf was definitely the better player. Again, if they were the same cost, I'd keep him. It sort of takes me to the same thing. Let's move on to your next trade here, too. This is you and Austin. Ramondre for Saquon.
Yep.
You touched on it when we were doing the rankings. I feel bad for Austin here because I thought it was close to fair when it happened. I think because of the fact that Saquon has had more injury issues, and also I know he signed a sort of a new deal here, so I don't worry too much about him holding out now. But I don't know. It's basically, would you rather pay, in my mind, $239 for an RB1 or for a high RB2 65? I think Saquon's upside is way more. And similar to what I just said with you and Griffin's trade there, it's not really great color because you're my co-host on this, but I probably slightly prefer your side. And with what has come out since then, a little bit more than slightly prefer your side, probably 60-40, I would take yours. I think for Austin, again, I said it when we covered your teams, I think it makes sense to get an RB1 in Saquon. And to know you're paying cost for him is good. I think there's surplus value with Stevenson that there's not with Saquon. I think Saquon's basically where I'd pay for him.
Yeah, Devonta Smith is not a guy we talk too much about, Nick. During the
he was my favorite of the receiver keeps. I said I like him.
Okay, I may have missed that. But I think the fact that he has all three of these receivers, you make a really good point. The context, I think, makes it more favorable for Austin to spend up on Saquon. And Austin, I'm sorry, buddy, I agree with Nick. The timing on Saquon did not work out well for you. I think Austin got a little revenge with the Zeke signing for Ramondre's value. But yeah, I won't add too much more. I think Saquon's the type of guy who really can be the number one running back, period. I don't think Stevenson has that upside. So hopefully it works out for Austin.
I think you're probably right. I think it's more about Belichick doesn't necessarily want to give any running back everything. Honestly, I don't think Zeke really takes much from Ramondre. Zeke's probably going to score some touchdowns and maybe some short yardage shit. But
unless Zeke is like new LeGarrette Blount and he's like the number 3 overall running back, he just scores 25
he's almost
touchdowns this year.
Size that was the issue.
He is.
I don't really think he's going to be very good this year. And every running back's in a timeshare too. So even if it just means Stevenson gets 60% instead of 65 or 70%, I don't think it matters that much. But again, there's something to be said for locking up a blue chip guy, and that is what Saquon is. If Saquon stays healthy, I don't have any trouble at all saying he's probably the RB5, RB6.
Yeah, I think he's easily top 6 or 7, pretty much locked, assuming he stays healthy.
I think about it a lot when I'm thinking about the values and the outcomes here for the power rankings as far as percentages. There's probably a 70% chance he's an RB1, a 20% chance he's an RB2, and then a 10% chance he gets hurt and just nothing. Those are kind of just made up on the spot. But my point is, when I look through it, I think there's no range of outcomes in my mind where Ramondre ends up hitting the top third or so of Saquon's outcomes. So I think Austin took a little bit of a higher shot there. But I think you took a safer buy getting Stevenson. And also, we both agree, it sounds like, that since this happened back on May 21st, the news sense that even though Zeke has signed in New England, I would say is worse for Saquon.
Yeah, I agree.
The last trade here is between the two of us. And this is probably the least fun of the three, just because there's no real stars involved. But I gave you Jordan Love. You gave me Khalil Herbert. I'll give my spin first. I know you're involved in this one too. Why don't you go first on this one? Sort of what do you think happened here? What do you think?
Yeah, so I've obviously been pretty trigger happy. So as Charlie would say in the baseball league, I think sometimes I make trades to make trades, right? But I think really you said this earlier, Nick, but I have Brock Purdy, and I'm happy to have him at the minimum $25. I really wanted a quarterback, so we played around with a couple of ideas, and I was really excited to get Jordan Love. You talk about range of outcomes. Well, you're getting a lot with Jordan Love. I really think he is the type of guy I have no idea what to expect. I really wouldn't be surprised to see him take a huge step up this year. Green Bay has proven to do that time and time again with the past 2 quarterbacks there. But I could see him also just crumbling apart and he fades out of the NFL. He's looked good so far preseason and throughout training camp. But really also, I do have a lot of depth players. So from my perspective, I was happy to buy a quarterback and sell one of my position players, if that gives me the ability to fill out the rest of my roster with really expensive, blue chip guys. So that's kind of the strategy I took.
We were good trade partners here because the way you have a lot of receivers and running backs, I have a lot of quarterbacks. At that point, I was deciding between Allen, Mahomes, Geno, and Love. I was not going to keep all four. I agree with you that Love is really exciting. I think for 4% of your budget, he's a great key to see if he is good. I think he's a lot better last year than he was his first year. And even if he's just passable as a passer, he's going to be useful in Superflex. He's going to probably be a high QB2, low QB1 anyway. So I think he's really useful. Great surplus value for you. I was going to keep 3. I definitely wouldn't have kept 4 quarterbacks. So I was not sure him, Geno, and one of Mahomes and Allen could all 3 coexist on my roster, which is why the trade happened. I also had no position players basically being kept. So even though I think you actually, ironically, are probably higher than I am on Khalil Herbert, I like Herbert fine. And I think he's going to help me avoid a scenario of doomsday on draft day where I get no running backs for some reason, where they just all go for too much. I know now I have a guy I think is like, the 26th best running back, 29th best running back. I have something there.
Yeah, I actually do.
I think he's similar in a lot of things. I think he could be better than that too.
I do like Herbert a lot. I think that he's kind of like a Pollard Jr. Like I actually think they're going to start using him in the passing game a lot more this year. Pop and frills, but it was fun to see that little screenplay in the preseason. Herbert really did look fast and had a nice acceleration there and scored a big touchdown. So yeah, I think the Bears, especially with Fields, I think, hopefully taking a big step this year. I think we tend to see this trend with mobile quarterbacks where if the offense changes and takes a step for the better, it really changes opportunities for the running back. So I remember in the RG3 years, how Morris was able to kind of step into the zone scheme and excel. I expect to see that hopefully with Dobbins coming back healthy this year. We've seen that now with the Eagles. Miles Sanders had a career year last year. So I do think that Herbert is kind of an unproven entity. So I think it's nice for you to have him pretty cheap and kind of see what you have. So I'd like it for both of us similarly. But it's funny we're talking about quarterbacks, and this kind of blends into our next segment if we have any time left, Nick. But I hope just to talk on a quick 1 or 2 minute opinion. And mine will kind of be quarterbacks. You're welcome to ride the caboose or consider another idea. But if there's a single takeaway that you're starting to see with the efficiencies, and we brought up wide receiver earlier, I did. You brought up quarterback, and I agree with you. It's interesting to look at all of these keepers because so many of them are quarterbacks. There aren't that many quarterbacks left. I think, we've got Josh Allen out there. We've got Lamar out there. We've got Kirk Cousins, Russell Wilson. It starts to get thin. So it'll be really fascinating to see, especially because some of the top guys, we're talking about Trevor Lawrence, we're talking about Joe Burrow. Some of these guys are cheap, and it's because year 1 or year 2 in this league, you're able to get them for what, $10, $15. Even Geno Smith on your team, undrafted maybe, emerges to be
now. Yeah, you're right.
Most accurate quarterback in the NFL, Geno Smith. So it's really interesting. I think as the league gets more efficient, I don't know what the draft will look like from a quarterback perspective, but that's kind of the biggest question mark that I have going into the draft.
I think I penalize teams without quarterbacks a good bit in my rankings for that reason. Because what you're describing, think about the best keepers this league has. The best keepers in my mind, I know we said we weren't really looking beyond this year, but when I looked at everybody's rosters, most of the best keepers are either receivers, like you said, and usually it's an archetype. It's like a Jamar Chase, who was a heralded prospect who was dropping passes his first year, so I got him dirt cheap.
Well, it's the ring around the football. He couldn't see it. It's not like
it spins. It spins, dude. The lights are spinning. It's hard to see it. Or more commonly than that, even other than some of the receivers like Waddle too. It's not just Chase. It's Waddle, Chase, guys who weren't immediately in great situations but became just great players immediately, so they were really valuable. More than that, even though it is the quarterbacks, because in a NFL with not barely enough quarterbacks to even start a super flex in a super big league when bye weeks are hitting, every quarterback like Desmond Ridder on Raymond's team has some value, even if you think he's like quarterback 29 or 30 in the NFL, and I kind of do. Just because at the minimum, you're going to need him sometimes, and when he has good matchups, you might want him over quarterback 20 anyway. So, but that also allows for if Jalen Hurts, I'm not saying Jalen Hurts is a bad quarterback. Jalen Hurts is a really good quarterback. He's like the 5th or 6th best quarterback in football, probably. But if you think back to what the NFL was saying in real NFL a year ago, the thought process was if the Eagles are good this year and Jalen Hurts isn't good with them, they have so much draft capital to get the next quarterback. Obviously, he's way better than that, and he's proven. I'm not trying to be critical of him.
You're right, though.
My point is now he's an amazing keeper. Similarly, Joe Burrow coming out, you didn't know for sure, amazing keeper. Deshaun Watson, suspended, amazing keeper. Geno Smith, career backup, became an amazing keeper. So I think because quarterbacks get hurt less and play more years than every other position, relative to other positions at least, quarterbacks play more years on average, if they're any good, and also in a super flex should probably be the highest paid player or close to it on your team anyway. They open themselves up to being really good long-term keepers if you get good ones. So as the league gets more efficient, and you're saying that already, you're going to see more and more quarterbacks get locked into cheap deals. And in the long run, you don't want to get priced out of that, I don't think. Not that it matters so much beyond a year or two. Football, look, Kyler Murray, for example, will be someone, hey, guys with money, buy Kyler Murray cheap this year. Yeah, he's on my list too. He's on their list probably already. There's your tip, guys. Buy Kyler Murray. He'll probably play in like week 3 if he can start the year. And next year, he'll start cheap.
That IL slot sure does come in handy, guys. So
doesn't it?
Draft an injured dude, put him on the IL, and then you get to pick someone up after the draft.
There's no salary cap in season.
Why would we have such a thing?
Uncle Raymond. But no, seriously though. So I think quarterbacks, as it gets further in years 4, 5, and 6, will become harder and harder to get at the high end. And you're right. Josh Allen was a defensible keeper if I'd kept him, and I didn't. And he's the only real, even close to blue chip quarterback out there, I think. Lamar, you could say is, but the last years wouldn't really say it. I think Lamar is a blue chip player when he's playing, but he's not in the tier of like the top 10 picks, I don't think.
No.
And even if you love Lamar, and I do love him on a per game basis, there's not like to be surplus value there. I think if someone buys Allen, the same way I bought Mahomes last year, there's a chance to have surplus value.
Jackson's a 2nd-round player, in my opinion, in this format.
We agree.
So,
and my point, you made a good point. The best one after is what? Kirk?
So this brings me...
Having $700 isn't that helpful.
Touch on a little bit of news. And Nick, we can speed this up if you've got to run. But
you're good. Keep going.
Quarterbacks. So who's after Kirk? And my news of the week is let Russ cook. So Russ is out there. He's in the draft pool, so anyone can bet on him. What is Russ going to do this year? He's another guy, to me, huge variance. You know, you hear Sean Payton talking about Cortland Sutton being, 2019 Michael Thomas. Give me a break. Like Cortland Sutton, I had him in multiple leagues last year, and he totally burned me. Yeah, Cortland sucks. So where I'm going with this, let Russ cook. What was the conception of that phrase? Well, for years, Nick, we would debate quarterbacks back to college. And I think we both agreed Russell Wilson was always in the top 3. Like, I loved Russell Wilson. He would just spin around like a top, throw the ball straight into the air, and somehow Tyler Lockett would catch it like 60 yards downfield for a touchdown. It was bizarre. And for whatever reason in Denver, letting Russ cook, it just didn't work out. And I was thinking back, why was Russ not cooking? Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll's the bad guy. Pete Carroll brings in Geno Smith. We'll start him. Pete Carroll's right. Geno Smith is good. Here's the news. This offseason, I'm not so sure if Geno's going to start because Pete Carroll has now stepped up himself. And I don't know if you've seen the clips.
Clip of him moving, dude.
Pete Carroll needs to cook. Let Pete cook. Pete Carroll, quarterback number 1, he is slinging it. He is slicing the defense apart. I just wanted to emphasize this on the pod. Like, Pete Carroll might be the man. We need to erase let Russ cook from our memories. Russell Wilson, will he do it this year with Sean Payton? We'll have to wait and see. But let Pete cook. That's what I wanted to say.
Bring Pete the meat. Or so, let Pete feed.
So
there's something there, I think, dude.
Yeah. So that's my news of the day. Real news. We're recording here on August 21st, Monday, before the draft. We were seeing some Jonathan Taylor news. What do you think, Nick? Nothing there?
No, we talked a little bit about this pre-show. Yeah. The running backs are just in a terrible spot, man. Austin Eckler saw a trade. Turns out nobody wants to pay anything for a running back. J.K. Dobbins saw a trade. No one's going to pay for you, J.K. Dobbins. Jonathan Taylor saw a trade. No one's going to pay for you, Jonathan Taylor. It's got to be changed in some way, legitimately, though. joking aside, I think the way running back contracts work, just because the mechanism for the franchise tag and the multiple franchise tags are that good, and the way their role actually impacts NFL games has resulted in the nerds like you with their spreadsheets, Kyle, you nerds, have made it impossible for running backs to have any real financial success. And I don't know. It's a little bit unfair to them. In my mind, Jonathan Taylor might even wait till the first game, but he's going to come back. He's going to have to play for the Colts. And he's probably going to have a really good year. He's playing, assuming he's healthy, with a running quarterback, like you mentioned. That's a great cheat code. Think about Mark Ingram. You mentioned Alfred Morris. Mark Ingram, the year with the Ravens, that Lamar first took over and we won the MVP in 2019. I mean, after that, Mark Ingram's juice was cooked.
That's another example I was fishing for. You're right.
Yeah.
Those mobile quarterbacks, it's like this huge boost, and it really just opens up so much for the running back. And a lot of times you see top 10 seasons out of these guys.
For sure.
So,
and he's a lot better than like Mark Ingram was then.
He was the #1 dynasty player just a few years ago, 2 years ago. So I totally
this past season, he was, I think.
I'm legitimately concerned about his injuries, some of the analysis that I've read. But guys, especially if you're potentially playing for next year to some extent, like you mentioned Kyler Murray, like Jonathan Taylor, like I can't wait to see what he goes for in our draft, because these are the guys who become great keepers. You buy them cheap because, hey, we're not so confident in their 2023-24 season, but what about next year? So we'll have
That's
to wait.
Part of the reason I don't penalize Griffin the way I think maybe you did back to our power ranks was I think Griffin's going to do as good as anybody or better than most people would at finding like the $6 out of 1,000 guy at the end of the auction who ends up being useful next year. I think if I'm me, not even necessarily Griffin, if I'm me going to the draft, I want my last few bench spots to be $1 guys.
Yep.
Just because, like you mentioned too, find someone who's hurt, find someone who's suspended, find someone like Watson last year. I'm the one who took him, traded him to Griffin mid-year. You want to get a couple of those guys because they end up being the best keeps.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I know I have my eye on several. So,
we're not Kyler anymore. I told all of them about Kyler.
I know. So now Kyler's going to go for what, like $80?
Oh, buy Kyler. Tim, buy Kyler. Raymond, buy Kyler. Pete,
right,
buy Kyler.
We've
Pete, spend $700 on Kyler.
Pete, Meaty Pete, Pete Carroll.
Yeah.
So yeah, we put quite a marathon out here, guys. I hope you enjoyed the first episode, not the last, of the YAC Boys. Nick, any final thoughts?
No, I'm real excited for the draft this weekend. I'm excited. Kyle I've joked a couple times now that you're doing the nerd spreadsheets. I do the same thing. I've looked at the historical first, second year of this draft. I can't wait to see how different the third year is. I think we are getting more efficient, but I can't wait. And I think probably our next year, we're going to roast some of you and praise some of you on your best and worst picks. So as you're having your amazing draft, welcome back football, make sure you don't make bad buys, or else me and Kyle are going to roast you.
Ooh, roasty toasty. All right. Thanks, guys. So that'll do it for episode 1. We'll see you next time.
Love you, Kyle.
Love you. Bye.